meant to look like we're going to World War III, but it's so theatrical at this point. What looks like absolute chaos is effectively, I think, an OPEC operation in order to integrate Iran. The deaths are real. The destruction of the infrastructure is real, but the outcome is negotiated with factions of power. America is to be asset stripped. Markets are not markets. They want the price of oil and energy to not be to the point where it does too much demand destruction, but the point where it can wipe out the middle class in a global reset. Palantir wants the revolution. They want you to come out because that's the justification for taking away the constitution, calling you domestic terrorists. You're either an insider or you're just stacking sats.
The speed at which the Iran situation is changing has gone completely insane, which is why we brought back Simon Dixon for an update. In this episode, he pulls back the curtain on how the deal was already negotiated behind the scenes, why it is being deliberately dragged out with all this theatrical chaos, and exactly what to expect next as this global wealth transfer and reset plays out. I'm Nathan with the BTC Mentor. Let's get into it. Simon, my friend, thank you so much for sitting down with me again last minute. I really appreciate it. I needed to get you back on because it feels like there is a ton of intentional chaos, like intentional fog of war. I'm having a hard time following things, so I need to speak to the master on this because even like since Friday, it's been absolutely insane. On Friday, it looked like the deal was very close. Iran was saying that the strait was opened. And then even in the evening and going to the weekend, it seems that's fallen apart. There's no plans for negotiation. Both Iran and the U.S. are blocking the strait. And then now come to the Monday morning here, it looks like negotiations might be back on the table. Vessels are still getting turned around. Vance might be going to Pakistan to make a deal. What the hell is going on here, my friend?
Yeah. Well, we will have a deal. It's meant to look like we're going to World War III, but it's so theatrical at this point. And people take offense with the word theatrical because people are dying here. And that's real. The deaths are real. The destruction of the infrastructure is real. The bombs and everything is real. But the outcome is negotiated with factions of power, and there is resistance against it. But we definitely are in the midst of what I call a OPEC and Financial Industrial Complex operation. So as a reminder, like in our previous ones, which we got lots of views on, so it's great to see. Hopefully people can go back to those and check them out as well. But the idea is that this is a transition to Iran being regionally integrated into the New World Order, let's call it that. And that is China's plan. So Trump's going to get credit for it. He'll be the guy. We're also getting a grooming of J.D. Vance in case we're going for some legacy planning. Remember the order. If you look at Biden, he was more aligned with the military-industrial complex. He was your traditional neocon. If you look at Trump, he's way more aligned with the financial-industrial complex. And if you look at J.D. Vance, he was groomed by Peter Thiel in the technical-industrial complex. Yep. And so you've got the complete iteration there. You have a war. Then you have Build Back Better. Then you have police and surveillance state. That is the uni-party agenda. At the same time, you transition to multipolarity, which is a recognition that China is the world's manufacturing base. America, private corporate interest, is a player in LNG and oil exports right now. And there is OPEC, which is all of the nation states which engage in oil production as a cartel, which consists of Iran, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, all the big players, Dubai as well. UAE, rather than Dubai. And so what we are essentially witnessing is the demolition of infrastructure that will be rebuilt under a new world order. And it will be rebuilt primarily by the financial industrial complex, transnational capital, which consists of the Gulf sovereign wealth funds as the major players in the region, and China's Belt and Road Initiative. So during this time, if you look at it over the last few years, China's gone from $1.4 trillion of US treasuries down to about $650 billion. That went into gold. That went into the Belt and Road Initiative. And it went into, alliances around de-dollarization for purchasing oil. And that oil was primarily purchased from Iran, Venezuela, other regions, but also the Gulf countries, and also LNG, while they were building out all their alternative energy. So China has decided, and it is negotiated with the real power in the West, which is the financial industrial complex, that America is to be asset stripped, but it is to basically perform an operation to get the price of oil as high as possible, the price of LNG to the point where they can asset strip the average person, wipe out the middle class in a global reset, let's call it. And there is record profits being done by the four companies in America that are part of the FIC and the OPEC coalition, which is Cheniere Energy. Cheniere Energy is the one that's exporting all of the liquefied natural gas. A subsidiary of Saudi Aramco is the one that's getting all the refinement contracts, which is Saudi sovereign, Saudi oil is getting all the reconstruction or the refining contracts, most likely from Venezuela, for the type of oil that it's able to refine. Golden Pass, which is 70% owned by Qatar Energy and 30% owned by Exxon, and then Exxon and Chevron, as well as some of the servicing of the rebuild contracts which happened in Iraq, like Halliburton and various others. So on the US private interest, that's who's benefiting right now. And they want the price of oil and energy to not be to the point where it does too much demand destruction, which is like, $150 or above. But the point where it can wipe out the middle class, where there is effectively a big print, which is that the US people pay the debt. And if they, are maxed out and the demand for bonds is going down because foreign investors are no longer investing, then you get the Fed to pay buy them, which is the regime change that's happening at the Federal Reserve level. Today, I think there's, the new Fed chair, Kevin Walsh, that's going through his hearing or whatever the process is. His job is to pretend that he wants to reduce the balance sheet when he will significantly increase the balance sheet. And obviously that requires lower interest rates as well, in order to not break the system as all of this debt is dumped upon and the debt just goes up and up and up and the Fed's balance sheet increases. Remember, the banks that own the Fed, they get a 6% dividend on all of the assets on the balance sheet of the Fed. And the shareholders are the 12 regional banks underneath it. And then you've got all the clearing banks that plug into the regional banks. So transnational capital is the shareholders of the Fed. They get to increase their balance sheet. They also, through their OPEC partnership, get much, much higher oil prices. At the same time, you manufacture a $1.5 trillion budget for the military industrial complex. So they get a half a trillion dollar, I think they're going in for $200 billion stimulus check. And you also, by creating and manufacturing this massive wealth transfer, which we are witnessing, you get the type of environment that can be revolutionary. Americans start talking about, their Second Amendments and guns and stuff. And that gives you the Palantir technical industrial complex, police and surveillance state, which are manufacturing. Palantir released its 22 point manifesto on X the other day, where it effectively wants to take over, it's all of its vision for effectively becoming the privatized police and surveillance state of the West. So if you look at all that Trump works for, Mick, Fick, and Tick, they've got their piece. And what we need right now is time in order to manufacture that wealth transfer and justify the big print, while keeping oil prices and energy prices as high as possible to create the crisis that justifies the big print. And at the same time, pretend that you're negotiating something else. So what did we get this week? Right in the beginning, so we're in week 7 now. I think we're approaching the 8th week of the Iran war. the infrastructure is, a lot of the overground infrastructure and energy infrastructure in Iran was targeted by the air campaigns. Israel took out the supreme leader, hardliner members of the IRGC, and we now have the reformed IRGC, the new supreme leader, and the China-aligned reform pragmatist Iranian government that is turning up to the negotiation tables. Everyone said no one would be negotiating. I said there will be a negotiation. So publicly, you had IRGC speaking to their audience. And so in the PR, they're saying, we're not going to turn up. We're not doing anything. We're going to take, everything you need, and showing that the IRGC is still in charge. Because there was never going to be a removal of the IRGC or the Islamic Republic. So they were always going to stay, but they needed to coax out the hardliners. At the same time, the deal had a bit of confusion around Lebanon.
Yes.
That's because they also need to effectively, the agreement that they'll never say that won't be in the agreement is that they're removing support for the proxies, as it were, or allies, depending on what side of the propaganda you want to sit. So if you're one of those people that believe, that this is about supporting resistance and a religious battle against, imperialism and Israel, then you kind of subscribe to this network of allies. One is in Lebanon, one is in Gaza, one is in Iraq, the other is in Yemen. And what happened prior to this is you had a series of negotiations that settled all of those. So in the case of Gaza, you had October the 7th, followed by the complete leveling, the genocide, and the failed ethnic cleansing attempt. But then that entered into a ceasefire and a border peace agreement, and they're still continuing to this day to take down infrastructure for the rebuild and manufacturing that they want to do. You had an operation between both the Biden administration and the Trump administration against the Houthis, aerial bombardments in Yemen. That ends with the Biden administration capitulating, the Trump administration capitulating, that then led to the ceasefire agreement within Gaza with Hamas. And then effectively you had this tick for tat between UAE and Saudi Arabia, looking like they were going to go to battle with each other and various other things. And they just settled all their different regions. So we're getting the settlements of all the ports. The Houthis effectively want to eventually integrate with the Yemenis government. And so they signed a deal with Saudi Arabia. And that controls the ports around the Horn of Africa. So if you imagine, like, you've got the Middle East here, when you're trying to export, you have the Strait of Hormuz, and then it goes around, and you've got Oman here, and you've got Yemen here, and then you go up around, then you've got Africa here. This is the areas that are controlled by the Houthis and the Red Sea. And then it goes up through Egypt and the Suez Canal and through to the Mediterranean into Europe. All of those different parts are being renegotiated and settled because America is no longer going to be protecting the waters when they're no longer a global empire, when they are a regional empire only. And so you ended up with Saudi signing an agreement with the Houthis, but there is always this tension that, the Houthis will attack and close the Red Sea, which would create an absolute disaster. Maybe we get that theater, but it will be theater to get to the next resolution.
Yep.
And then you started seeing UAE. There was recognition by Israel of Somaliland, which is UAE ports. And then you had Turkey taking control of its assets in Somalia. Effectively, this is splitting the region between the regional powers, which is Turkey, and an Iran operation with the Strait of Hormuz. And Saudi will be King GCC effectively by the end of this. They have the religious locations, Mecca, Medina, and then they will be involved in all the rebuild contracts. And the Gulf countries have built alternative payment systems and a structure for de-dollarization, without, a mechanism for slowly coming off the peg and having alternative payment routes, which obviously would have been negotiated with China because China is their biggest customer. And so Iran is also China's biggest customer. And the military industrial complex, financial industrial complex, and technical industrial complex need China's rare earth minerals and resources and exports in order to function. So everyone is a China dependency here. So what you're seeing, what looks like absolute chaos, the threat of nuclear war, World War III, is effectively, I think, an OPEC operation in order to integrate Iran into the region and manage a transition away from, in an acceptable way that doesn't cause civil unrest within Iran. And if this was meant to cause civil unrest, then you would have seen something that looked like Syria, i.e., you would have done the regime change operation. You would have effectively tried to create absolute carnage, and you would have, done that type of operation. If you were actually doing the Iraq model, like a genuine prop up the petrodollar war for the military, you're going to need 1 million troops to do a ground invasion.
Yeah, not 10,000.
And so, yeah, at the moment, I think we've had about 50,000 built up around there. That's nothing. Like you cannot invade. Anything you do with those 50,000 troops will just be sending them into a death box. Like, if you are actually trying to invade Iran, you need 1 million troops minimum. Then you'd effectively do the ground invasion, and then you take 20 years to try and occupy the land and take out and build the new government, and you'd have a forever war. And then you take over the oil and force it in pricing in dollars. None of that is actually happening. Everything you're seeing is looking like that, right? So what actually did happen? Well, the situation that we got right now is effectively Iran said we're closing the Strait of Hormuz. What does that mean?
Yeah.
That means that we will fire at you if you try and get your shipments through, and you need our permission to get through. Immediately, that triggered off Lloyd's of London. Lloyd's of London says, right, we're not insuring any shipments unless you give us some kind of guarantee from Iran that this isn't going to be fired at, which effectively closes the strait. Then America later comes along and does the blockade and says, right, we're going to blockade. And so now what's the current situation? If you want to get a shipment through and you're a genuine, oil tanker or commercial ship or something, you ain't going through without insurance. It's an unacceptable risk, right? So you need permission from Lloyd's of London. Lloyd's of London then needs permission from Iran on some kind of security guarantee and America. So you've got a blockade of a blockade and insurance. So that's the current situation. The alternative is you could just decide to go through anyway and chance it. But the only ones that are going to do that is somebody that got a backdoor deal. And that backdoor deal means you have to have a deal with America, which means you're in the circles of the FIC. You're at the BlackRock, JP Morgan type of level. And you need deals with Iran and the IRGC as well. And not just the government, but the IRGC. And so those are the only shipments to get through. Who has the capacity to do that? Pretty much only India, Japan, China as a sovereign nation state. And so these are the people that have those types of relationships and leverage and the ability to take the risk because maybe they don't need the insurance, or they could provide the insurance guarantees. So that's the theatrical element of it. That's what actually is required to get a shipment through. And so now we know that effectively you've got China, Iran, and American factions of power and Lloyd's of London all working together. That is the financial industrial complex. That is transnational capital. That is the sovereign wealth funds, the people. So that's what it actually means. Now, what you can announce, what you can do, so that's what what that looks like. Then you also need you need a mechanism for getting towards a negotiation. So we had this whole operation of saying, grooming, oh, we don't believe in Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. Remember, Jared Kushner is not even a government official. Yep. He represents Trump's private interest. He's the one managing all of Trump's family wealth. He's also a Zionist in the Epstein blackmail operations, and he's also funded by the Gulf countries in terms of affinity partners and various other things. So his job is to, manage that Trump gets paid with Gulf money and satisfies the Israeli Zionist that needs bribing as you transition to this new vision of regional stability for OPEC and the FIC, basically. So you've got and so Steve Witkoff is just like a mafia real estate New York guy, but so they came up and said, well, we want the vice president there, so we need JD Vance. Okay, so I like to call these ceasefire negotiations check-ins. Really reporting on what's actually happened, because they were negotiating before. They were negotiating during. They will be negotiating afterwards. The negotiations have never stopped. But there is a lot of theater around IRGC in Iran needs to demonstrate we're holding out. That kind of maintains public narrative at the same time as releasing all their Lego videos, and which is really speaking to the youth of America that is kind of been exposed to this Epstein regime and all these different things, insider trading. I mean, the PR kicks ass. Like, let's face it, this the PR is absolutely brilliant. Effectively, we then had the meeting, and the meeting said we couldn't reach a deal. Yeah. Then you had this escalation cycle, and now we've got the meeting happened in Islamabad in Pakistan. If you look at Pakistan, there's a couple of interesting things there. Pakistan, if you look during COVID, they ran out of dollar reserves. They're deep in debt in the IMF. And they got a bailout from two factions of power of transnational capital. China, through the Belt and Roads Initiative. And they also got a bailout because China has lots of dollars from all of its trade. And they also got a bailout from UAE. And so they're effectively always kept on the border of dollar bankruptcy via their IMF debt, but bailed out via the Gulf countries and China. One thing that happened as UAE hit financial stress, which is effectively UAE is a vassal for the financial industrial complex within the GCC, and it had its, it's a financial center really, more than anything else in terms of, there's oil. But if you look at it, really, it's real estate, it's a financial center, it's a crypto capital, like all these different things. There's been massive transfer from retail to institutional. If you look at the UAE ETFs, you can see that about 40% of the composition is financial services, and they're going up. ETFs are doing well. We're meant to be told that this is a disaster and UAE is over and all that type of stuff. That's to get retail to sell, and institutions are buying at these cheaper prices. That gives them a foothold in GCC in the New World Order. Same is happening via India. That's why Israel, UAE, India are kind of aligned. You got the BRICS part via India, and then you've got and it just so happens that it's the Indian shipments that are getting through, with Iranian oil via UAE. So if UAE and Iran are in a war right now, why is it that the second largest trading partner of Iran is UAE? And what does the UAE banking system do? It gives Iran the mechanism for circumventing sanctions via its largest trading partner, China. And China, we're meant to be led to believe, is like enemies with India and various, like, obviously you have these tick for that. But once you actually go through all the trade relationships, you realize how comical this all is, really. And so, what is Iran? So effectively, Iran has destroyed the US infrastructure. Israel has done decapitation campaigns within the IRGC. America has blown up a lot of the infrastructure that leads to. So now we've got billions and billions and billions of dollars of rebuild infrastructure contracts. What was the compensation for America? Well, remember, America's not a sovereign state. Cheniere Energy, Golden Pass, Chevron, Exxon, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamic, Raytheon, Boeing, JP Morgan, BlackRock, they all do incredibly well. Their assets, BlackRock's assets under administration has gone from 12 trillion to 14 trillion. I thought this is just wealth transfer. That's all this is. We got, we got the higher prices, that wipes out the middle class further and further, takes them over the edge, and that type of stuff. So you can see exactly. And these are all the people that negotiate with the OPEC members. So OPEC's kicking ass. What sovereign nations are doing incredibly well? Iran and Russia. And so Iran is selling record levels of oil to China at highest prices. And then the blockade is meant to stop that. Okay. But the blockade is leading up to Xi Jinping and Trump meeting on the 14th of May. And if China wanted to say, all right, you're actually, you got the narrative that the magatards are saying, yeah, we're choking off China. We're going to kill China. China bought 1.4 billion barrels of oil at $45 or around those prices. It's bailing out countries. It's bailing out Taiwan in exchange for normalization agreements. Japan in exchange for normalization agreements. South Korea in exchange for normalization agreements. What else is pretty interesting? Look at who's going into massive financial distress in Europe first. You got UK and you got Netherlands. In Asia, you got South Korea and you got Taiwan. Taiwan, South Korea, Netherlands. That's the complete infrastructure for the semiconductor chip manufacturing industry. Part of it happens in Netherlands, part of it happens in South Korea, and part of it happens in Taiwan. And those just happen to be the three that are going into distress. This is a mechanism for, putting strategic investments into the chip manufacturing supply chains, because both China and America need them. They're both dependent. They're both dependents. So China's going off on its own path and trying to build it. America's going off its own path. They got TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, to build out, but they're like 5 years away on the American side. So you've got that. That also requires the helium and various other components that are stuck in the strait. When you really follow all of these different supply chains, this is just an absolute wealth transfer mechanism for tick, thick, and mick. And that can only happen if there is coordination with factions of power. And where is the factions of power? People think, well, OPEC is one of those. Iran, Saudi Arabia, Russia, they're all in these agreements. And then you have, obviously, BlackRock, which is the coordinating part of the privatized financial interest. Anyway, all of this to say is that needs to all be renegotiated. We're repricing. We're having force majeure contracts.
Yep.
And this is the global reset mechanism. Create inflation, create demand destruction. So initially you get the big spike in prices. We had a 4% print in America. And then you create demand destruction because the higher oil prices, they're still meeting all the oil demand, but the demand for oil is significantly lower because you create a recession. In that recession, you extract as much value, distressed assets, privatization of countries that are in distress. You take UK assets, you take European assets, you take Canadian assets, you take Australian assets, South Korean assets, Japanese assets, and effectively the China Belt and Road Initiative will be bailing out from the east. and the financial industrial complex will be providing capital in the West. All of that is happening. That's what this war really is. Then you come like a further layer down, and you've got the expulsion of US from its previous role as global empire, pushing it back into regional. And then there is resistance of self-interest, which is why every time you get a announcement, it then leads to either we've already got everyone that's on board with the plan, or we got someone that resists against it, and then it goes back into a new theater, probably internal regime change from the Iran IRGC side. And then we've also got the political regime change that will happen within Israel after this operation as a result of leaving Hezbollah to destroy Israel and Israel to destroy Hezbollah. And so you have the whole Lebanese side as well, because they're resolving all of the different proxies. What happened in Iraq and Syria during this? US exits. So we've had US exiting from the region. We've had resolution of oil resources, and we've had Iran proxies that haven't effectively been activated. And so you can see everything is being, resolved around this vision of regional stability within the Middle East. And then on the American side, you've still got the Trump going nuts at Candace Owen, Alex Jones, Tucker Carlson, all the people that are effectively de-radicalizing the American evangelical Christians away from the Zionist, type of thing. Even Alex Jones now is kind of saying, yeah, Trump's controlled by the Zionists. So this is like mainstream narrative now. So you get the ruin of Trump's reputation, and suddenly, knowing that there is going to be a peace agreement and that this is a done deal, J.D. Vance is the guy that's going to be the guy of peace. And we also have on the Iran side, the branding of Arachi. Arachi is doing all the public PR. Whenever you see these amazing Lego videos and you see Arachi as the IRGC guy, effectively you're rebranding Iran in the mind of the person that thought that Iran was a bunch of terrorists that chop off heads, and you think of ISIS or something like that. That was the branding that it had. You're seeing that rebranding so that Arachi can come in as the IRGC guy, and then you have this reformist. So now we're at a deal. What are they actually negotiating? Well, you need a theater publicly to pretend what they're negotiating about. What has always been the theater? It's always been highly enriched uranium. Iran is 2 weeks away from a nuclear bomb for 30 years. That narrative has been incredibly useful anytime you want to engage in the negotiation. So publicly, they're talking about the nuclear program and enrichment. And they are actually negotiating around that as well, because there will be, a civilian nuclear program. Like part of all of this is to get the energy needed for all the AI and robotics and global government, the infrastructure that's being built, and all the energy that's needed for that. So publicly you have that, but what are they really negotiating? They're negotiating oil and petrodollar, effectively. That's what this really is. So you got America, you got the Gulf countries that effectively know, all right, if you remove sanctions from Iran, that's 3 to 4 million barrels per day that can come online. That will crash the price of oil. And we want oil prices higher in OPEC. So we want Iran to be a part of OPEC. And so we need a managed negotiation of how they release that oil in a post-sanction world. We also kind of test removal of sanctions. So they say, well, to get the price of oil down, we'll remove the sanctions. You also get this whole narrative around the Strait of Hormuz, which is effectively an economic agreement, how you will fund the rebuild. But effectively, it is warming up to the fact that they're going to be trading partners in an acceptable narrative without internal civil unrest within Iran. So now you've got trade agreements, sanction removal, a fake negotiation, and a real negotiation. And so the Gulf countries want to make sure that Iran releases oil. And so they're leveraging the US to negotiate that. Trump also is negotiating effectively for his bosses, which is big oil, Cheniere, the Financial Industrial Complex, all these people. What does China want? Well, Iran wants to make sure that some of its oil sales are done in the yuan. And both Saudi Arabia and Iran are going to be pretty powerful at the end of this, depending on the agreement eventually. Because they've effectively, the difference is that Iran's got like 90 million population for about 300 million barrels of oil, plus all the other things. We're talking about oil, but for the interest of time, we don't go through all the other components. Saudi Arabia's got 35 million with 300 million. And obviously America has 350 million people. So most of its oil is used, but it's exporting more and more as well. And so effectively, they've got to get that balance right between power. And Iran wants to effectively control some of the transition between the petrodollar and the petro-yuan. Saudi wants that role, but Iran wants a piece of it.
Yep.
And so when you make that transition, the negotiating leverage that Iran and Saudi have at the end of this is the petrodollar versus the petro-yuan. And effectively, they want to manage that transition, and the financial industrial complex wants a piece. And so that's what's really being negotiated. They want to manage that transition. And then America can't really have a losing narrative. So it needs something theatrical to give back to MAGA to say, yes, it was us. So they did the blockade. The blockade was the perfect narrative to say, we're in charge. We're going to stop you, Iran. And what does it do? It basically says, on the 22nd we're meeting, which I think is tomorrow in Islamabad, Pakistan, IRGC are going to say, we're not going. But they're going to go. And America are basically saying, right, we need a deal by the 22nd because we're nearing the end. So make sure that we've got all these percentages negotiated. But we're going to create a narrative where JD Vance comes out and said, we can't have a nuclear, Iran and the same old shit that we've been hearing for 30 years. But also that provides the narrative that Israel needs. Remember, Israel is in absolute disarray, like in carnage right now. The coalition government within Israel is Benjamin Netanyahu is the tame one. That's how it is. His government is the absolute radical terrorist Zionists that are funding all the Israeli settlers to kill Palestinians in the West Bank. They're the hardliners. Okay. So he needs to kind of manage narrative for them. He can't walk away and say, by the way, Iran's going to be enriching oil. Israel has lost significantly. Now, the forward-facing narrative is Israel rules the world, and Israel's making all the decisions. Now, that's true to a certain degree, but Israel is what? It is the same transnational capital, military industrial complex, technical industrial complex, and financial industrial complex that controls America, UK, and the collective West as well. But for some reason, they're able to say Israel as a nation state controls it. No, this is just a jurisdiction for money laundering and crime, with an acceptable narrative. Now, he needs to maintain that narrative because at some stage, he needs war. So you have to continue the Lebanon operation and Hezbollah. So you let them go at it. Iran says we've signed the deal, but it can't be seen to have given up on the axis of resistance when it's given up on the axis of resistance. So I'm expecting a deal soon. You may get escalate to de-escalate, but nothing stops this train. It's so clear to me that this is all theatrical. We're not going to World War III. There's going to be no nukes. And really, they're just negotiating over oil. And this is the global reset that executes this.
There's a few
that
things.
Was the short answer, wasn't it?
That was a very short answer. I appreciate that.
When I first got into Bitcoin, I was overwhelmed. The jargon, the security risks, the fear that one mistake could cost everything. I remember staring at my screen and wondering, are my keys safe? Did I do this right? That experience is why I started BTC Sessions. For over a decade, this channel has helped millions of people like you learn how to use and secure Bitcoin. But I realized something. For many people, videos aren't enough. Everyone learns differently. Some need to ask questions in real time as an expert walks through their setup, their goals, and their threat model. And certain things like advanced cold storage, inheritance planning, privacy, and node or mining setups often can't be fully solved by watching another tutorial. So I built BTC Mentor. I recruited the best Bitcoin educators on the planet to work with you one-on-one. Real experts, real answers, personalized hands-on guidance tailored to your exact situation. Whether you're brand new or building a complex setup, we meet you where you're at and walk with you step by step. By the end, you don't just hope your Bitcoin is safe, you know it is. If you're ready for that level of confidence, then head to btcmentor.io and book a call with us today.
There's so much to unpack. There's a few things that jumped out at me that I want to touch on for sure. So one is this idea of having oil be high but not too high. I think it was Doomberg that commented, like, if the closing the Strait of Hormuz doesn't get you to 150 barrel, then like what necessarily does? And I wonder if some of the like negotiation on off is purposely trying to manipulate the oil price to an acceptable level. Because effectively, like on Friday, they just kicked it down like 37% or something. Like it's just over 9 days. And so I wonder if that's them trying to basically put a high watermark and keep it where it needs to be. The other one that I want to kind of tease apart is one.
Should we do one question at a time? Let's do that, and then we'll do the next one.
Let's do that one first. Yeah, effectively, are they manipulating oil strategically through just narrative?
It's so obvious right now, like that markets are not markets. If you look at, I talked about how BlackRock now manages $14 trillion.
Yeah.
What I didn't talk about is Aladdin.
Yes.
Aladdin is its AI technology that's used by pretty much every central bank, every sovereign wealth fund, every pension fund manager, and every endowment fund and insurance company for scenario planning and allocating capital. That's $25 trillion of capital using BlackRock's Aladdin. If you look at the market, 50% of it is happening by bots.
Yeah.
So you've got effectively BlackRock's Aladdin AI, which all the big pools of capital in the world are using to scenario plan. And BlackRock can push out a scenario, and 50% of capital is now automatic reallocations anyway into BlackRock ETFs. And so they cornered the market. Like, markets are not markets.
Yeah.
Like, this is algorithmic manipulation that is reading Twitter sentiments, X sentiments, and real institutional scenario planning, which is managed by BlackRock's Aladdin technology. So you've got all of these market moves. They can effectively scenario plan the same thing to all the sovereign wealth funds, all the central banks, all the treasury departments, all the pension funds. And they're like coming across like they're genius, but they're all using the same. This is such a capture of markets. It is effectively the Dutch East India Company or the British East India Company at this stage in a neo, form. So BlackRock's, got the capital. Trump knows what he's going to post on Truth Social. We get right down to the crypto like prediction market degenerate gamblers putting on ginormous trades 15-minute ahead. That's the Trump family via some mechanism, whether it's Brandon Trump or Eric Trump or Donald Trump Jr., via Justin's son or CZ or whoever he pardoned in exchange for his quid pro quo, type of thing. We're getting all the scamming that is happening in the crypto market by the Trump family. Next level. Like, they were putting World Liberty Token, pulling out $150 million loans, draining all these contracts. I've always said, look, this part I can't prove. But suddenly we get all these crypto hacks, over this weekend. 600 million here and, Aave pulled here and all that stuff. And it's always North Korea. It's always the Lazarus group, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Zach XBT, anyone ever looked into his connections to Zionism? Like, you look into his connections, like, just saying. I'm pretty sure it's Israel that is code word for Lazarus Group and North Korea. I couldn't prove it, but it just so happens that it's always North Korea, and it always seems to align with these. Anyway, like that's a bit of speculation. I'll leave the comments to kind of dig deeper into that. But it's always that Zach XBT that exposes it, and it's always North Korea that's doing it for some reason. Anyway, yeah, Trump is scamming like crazy, with in the crypto markets. And then you get, the IRGC or like releasing these Lego videos on market manipulation. And we've always had this disaster on Friday, resolved on Monday.
Yes.
They're pumping up, like the market manipulation is insane. And one day, you sound like a radical Democrat when you say it with Trump derangement syndrome. But hopefully one day the CFTC will investigate this stuff. It's just obvious right now at this point. You don't need Trump
derangement. Into the
derangement.
weekend. It's always going into the weekend without fail. Every Friday and then over the chaos over the weekend, then resolved on Monday.
Yeah. So they're playing the oil markets. The FIC is making shit tons of money. The Trump family is probably becoming wealthier than they could ever imagine. They're getting to pay down a lot of their debt. It's one big, ginormous game for them. Like it is just wealth extraction and corruption to the highest level. And 15 minutes before he posts, you always see this massive shift in the futures markets and various other stuff. So hopefully this will become an investigation, because I think it's absolutely fascinating. But we still weren't told who did all the short trades before 9/11, even though they know. Lucky Howard Lutnick seems to always be involved in these things. But anyway, we'll see. So yeah, oil is just a game right now. They don't let it go to the point where it's complete demand destruction. They want some demand destruction.
Yep.
And then whenever it gets to that $115 on 1 month futures, you just get a news that we're about to go to peace. And each time it gets more and more radical. Like, before it was just, we've done a deal. Then it was, we're gonna drop a nuclear bomb and we're gonna do civilian casualties in Iran. Then it was, we're doing a blockade, we're sending the Navy over. Next time it will be whatever it needs to be. But around the negotiation, there's all the market manipulation and just absolute insider trading, criminal activity. No doubt that's happening.
No, 100%. By the way, just two quick side notes. One, the blockade to me always seemed like a little bit ridiculous. Like, you don't fire me, I quit. It's like, okay, sure, we're just gonna throw this up on top of it. And then quick side note, and then I want to continue with oil, because I didn't realize that JP Morgan was so invested, I believe, in Anthropic. And we have all the talk of like Mythos and stuff coming out recently as well, too. Is JP Morgan trying to have their own version of Aladdin? Like, is the commercial banking system going after the asset managers and trying to compete with Aladdin, or just completely unrelated? Those things popped up in my mind.
Yeah, the Anthropic side is more related to the military industrial complex, I would say. So, BlackRock has got all the financial market manipulation through its network of hedge funds and Jane Street and Citadel and all that type of stuff. And obviously, JP Morgan is one of the nodes in that network, but they're very much focused on the securitization, financialization. The retail banking is very much focused on the stable coin, making sure that banks get the favorable terms with Genius Act and Clarity Act. But the technical industrial complex is getting the social credit scores, the police surveillance state, the pre-crime, all of the border security contracts, all of the data through Department of Government Efficiency, all that type of stuff. But the military industrial complex side, we're getting this interesting division of labor. I noticed that there was like a subpoena for Mark Zuckerberg around like Jeffrey Epstein money and various other things going through Meta, which they rebranded, and now they're not doing the metaverse. Apparently, they're doing AI instead.
Yeah.
But Anthropic, I think, did a pretty interesting thing. It wants many of the international contracts. So what the MIC is doing right now is they're hedging around a multipolar world. So the FIC wants to build, multipolar financial centers. The TIC wants to do global surveillance and police state. And the MIC wants to hedge away from America and build all alternative contracts. And it's mainly through cybersecurity and artificial intelligence now as well. So you had this, all right, Anthropic is fighting the US government. That means international contracts. You sign international MIC contracts. And then you have the others, which are like working with America first. So you get the domestic contracts, and then you can take those algorithms and you can start selling them globally via like Anthropic and stuff.
Okay, that makes sense. So switching back to oil for a second, then, if we're reaching the point of actually having the deal, we're getting close to the deal happening. The part that I can't get my head around is if they want to keep oil prices high, how do they possibly do that with announcing a deal? I would think that it's basically as soon as the deal is done, it's set, it's finalized, we got all the narratives going out there around it, that oil is going to tank, we're going to see demand destruction just from the effects that we already had, and then the price is just going to shoot down. But there must be something that I'm missing if they're going to maintain it at that higher level.
No, once the deal's done, yeah, it will crash.
Well,
now whether it,
I'll say quickly, if it does crash, does that mean they've finished the process of strip mining? Because if it crashes, then how do we justify the big print or try to have more forced sellers so that the assets can be accumulated by FIC?
Yeah, I don't know the timing, and that kind of really sets what the framework of what they're, there's, I can only speculate at this point, but this is why I think we had, if you'll know, I originally thought this was going to be like a 12-day war, theatrical thing like last time, but it was way, way, way bigger, like in terms of what they tried to condense into this. But yeah, it will become obvious within hindsight, but projecting forward, I think we're getting close to a deal. How many more weeks, how many escalate to de-escalate we need? I think really depends upon how many of those repricing events and what model they want to push forward after this.
Okay, that makes sense to me. The other one that I want to tease apart regarding the deal aspect of it as well too, do you think there will be any uranium enrichment in the deal at all? Like, are they going to be able to have some, I don't know what percentage, like some civilian Iranian enrichment in the deal, or is it going to be like a hard no for a short period of time? How are they going to basically skirt that and still keep the Zionist side happy?
Yeah. So what is the end goal of this? I think that there's going to be energy agreements between the Gulf countries and Iran with some FIC investment and some Belt and Road Initiative investment. There's going to be integration into the Gulf parallel systems. There's the India side as well. There's the India, Middle East, Europe corridor that's been built that requires normalization with Iran in order to get there. Those are all going to be split up between, FIC, Belt and Road Initiative, and Gulf Sovereign Wealth Funds. I don't know what the exact ratio is going to be, but and I don't know exactly what the components are. I don't. It all depends really, because the balancing act here is that Israel needs to declare we've got this covered because they give up the narrative. America needs to show we got this under control. And Iran needs to go back to the IRGC and say, we got a good deal and there's a justification for these new agreements that we're going to be doing. And so I think the ratio, it will be really interesting to see what it comes out, but it's really about satisfying those factions. I could speculate, but I don't really know. We'll find out when the deal comes. And then it will be one of those things that's easier to analyze once you see it.
No, 100%. Do you think it's possible, like, I guess the difference between like 0 and even 1% is huge. Do you think they'll have some enrichment, or is it even possible that Iran could forego enrichment at all for other terms? Do they need that?
In order to have regional stability, you need to give up the narrative of we're 2 weeks away from a nuclear bomb.
Yeah.
And you need to stop the proxy, which created the justification for the $1 trillion of money printing for the MIC. And so that's what we're witnessing here. The narrative needs to go because it was made up in the first place, and it was always the justification, that whole strategic tension between Iran and Israel, never bombing each other for 30 years, but always being 2 weeks away and having the resistance that want to kill the Jews type of all that made up narrative, was to lead to this negotiation effectively. Yep. But there are there are proxies that want the old world, like, And that's the complexity of this. Like, and that's why I think it's gone on for a bit longer than everyone managed. But I think in the end, the 2 weeks away from a nuke needs to die as a narrative. Otherwise, you don't get the regional stability. That was just a justification for Israel and Mick.
Okay, perfect.
You can do it just like a deal, though. Like, I used to work in investment banking, and what you tend to do is you have external security guarantees by plugging together different parties, and you have ratchet clauses where you do this for year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5. And if the goals are met, then there's rewards. And then you tie everyone together by having like payout clauses. So I always think of things in terms of M&A deals. And whenever you've got a scenario where you're trying to plug together two companies and there's different interests, you just make sure that all the parties through financial and economic deals are all incentivized to hold the deal. And then you have external parties that you trust. And so there may be some Russia and China in there as well.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense.
CoinKite has been in the game for years, creating hands down the best and most secure hardware when it comes to securing your Bitcoin. The Cold Card Q is an absolute powerhouse and my daily driver, and it's ideal for newcomers and advanced users alike. The Tap Signer gives you a low-cost, user-friendly option for those just getting started or for convenience when traveling. You can head to coinkite.com and use code BTC Sessions for discounts, or simply scan the QR code on the screen to get started right away. One company I like pointing people to when they ask about Bitcoin mining is Abundant Mines. They were founded by Bo and Christine Turner after losing over $500,000 to broken promises in the mining industry. And they built their hosting model to remove the usual headaches. With Abundant Mines, you own your machines and keep 100% of the Bitcoin you mine. There's no revenue share, no hidden skims. Pricing is simple. One flat monthly fee covers power, parts, labor, and repairs. They also guarantee uptime. If a machine goes down, their hash rate redirect system routes hash power from their fleet, so earnings don't just stop. And every machine is insured at full replacement value. Everything is hosted in the US, powered by Hydro, and mining equipment may qualify for 100% year one bonus depreciation. Learn more at abundantmines.com/sessions.
The other thing I want to make sure that we touch on too, for anyone that might not be familiar, there's kind of two parts to this. For anyone that might not be familiar with JD Vance's ties to Peter Thiel and Palantir, can you briefly comment on that? And then the thing that I have in my mind is if Trump is foregoing so much of his reputation with the base. We talked about like Candace and Alex Jones and that as well too. How are they? I don't see how they're going to be able to not have that stink of reputation on Vance to try and have him be the next guy to support the technical industrial complex in the coming years.
Yeah. So the Fictic and Mick have got both the Democrats and the Republicans. So if there is a Republican strategy, then maybe it's JD Vance. That's what it looks like is building here. But he's definitely the ticks guy. So if you don't know JD Vance is not his name. And no, although he said he was a veteran, I think he was like in the PR department or media department of the military. So that's not his story. And he was a guy that very, very young, for some reason, received shitloads of money from Peter Thiel, and with no financial background or investment background, was given a venture capital fund funded by Peter Thiel, and suddenly was out of nowhere the guy that Trump selected to be the vice president with virtually no political career. So he was groomed, and he was Peter Thiel's guy for the technical industrial complex, and he was like anti-Iran. Now he is, I want peace with Iran. And, the story they're saying is JD Vance is trying to stop Trump, and Netanyahu controls Trump. That's like the story in the alternative media. And I think even Trump today came out and said it wasn't Netanyahu that told me to go to war with Iran. It's even going like that mainstream now. Wow. In terms of discussing the story.
Yeah.
So that's like, so JD Vance is, if he gets elected, then this is the acceleration of the police and surveillance state. This is Palantir is the company. They beta tested on UK, like all the pre-crime arrests and social media arrests. That was Palantir. They did the genocide in Gaza. They did the occupation in West Bank. They were integrated into the drones in Ukraine. They've been doing, crowd control in Saudi Arabia through the annual Hajj pilgrimage. And they are like 50% of all their revenue is government contracts, DARPA funding. So, this is effectively everything in America is going to be privatized. The Fed is being hollowed out and everything's being handed over to the privatized prison industry. ICE is privatized security industry. Palantir is artificial intelligence enforcement and pre-crime. The Constitution is dying. I'm sorry to tell you, you can get angry at me right now, but your First Amendment's not going to help you. They've got America is split into two. You're either part of the elites that own the assets, and they just don't care. They don't speak out in the system because they're effectively financially rewarded by the system. If you're pumping all of this Fed money into the stock market, you'll meet people. They just don't care about all the other Americans. They only care about the preservation of their value and their real estate and their stocks. And they're a part of that, so they don't speak out against it. Or you have the people that are speaking out. They are really struggling. Like, I'm sure we've all watched those TikTok videos of, Americans freaking out in cars, just mentally going insane, saying, I can't afford anything. Like, what is going on with these prices? Demotivated, like, just, I don't feel like I can get a job. I just don't feel where we've seen those videos, right? That's the vast majority of Americans.
Yeah.
Now, they have no power, but they speak out. They got freedom of speech. They got, their people are there. Nothing's going to happen. They're now bloody burning down warehouses, which is only going to lead to the people that worked in that warehouse losing that job. And the company that is outsourcing everything and accelerating AI and robotics, sadly, the activism isn't going to work. And then they say, well, we've got the world's largest army and we got the Second Amendment and guns. What are you going to do? Shoot? They want the revolution. Palantir wants the revolution. They want you to come out because that's the justification for taking away the Constitution and doing their Patriot Act, calling you domestic terrorists. They need you to be domestic terrorists so that they can take away your constitutional right. Nothing stops that train. Nothing.
Which they already started too. If we go back and look at like January 6th and things as well too, they've already, at least it feels to me over the last couple of years, they started normalizing calling American citizens domestic terrorists under kind of political guise. Was it Whitmer that had like the plot to kidnap her and stuff as well too? I feel like they've been setting the table for that justification.
Yeah. And remember how they do it. They've been doing, the American military industrial complex, deep state, CIA, National Endowment of Democracy, USAID. They've been doing this globally forever, ever since America, they got it from us. It was the Brits, the MI6 came up with all this shit, that never stops. All they're doing is they're bringing it back home. So if you don't create the revolution, they'll create it for you. Yeah. What did they do on January the 6th? There were CIA operatives that were shooting guns, right?
Yeah.
They're doing what they always did with color revolutions in the global south to overthrow governments and destabilize countries. They're doing it at home. So you being the revolutionary, if you don't shoot people, the CIA will do it for you. They're manufacturing domestic terrorism. Why? Because they profit from putting you in prison. They profit from deportations. They profit from taking you to prison without actually, getting your moment in the court. And they're deconstruct, like it's like that to think that that's your resistance. You got to understand the resistance is what you do with your money. Like the best resistance is you have to become wealthy. I'm sorry to say that if you haven't become wealthy yet, the only people that change your system are the people that can buy the politicians, that can engage in lobbies. that can create their own companies, that can invest in decentralized technology, that have the Bitcoin in self-custody, that have the sovereign wealth. Those are the next elites. And you need to become one of those, or you're going to be relying upon those, because the political system is not going to protect you. There is no votes. There is no government that's going to be reformed. Like, this is it. This is, or you just create your own parallel economies in your communities where, but the government's dead. There's no political solution. The sooner you come to terms with that, the better.
I agree. I fully agree with that. Speaking of Bitcoin, I want to make sure we touch on this as well too. The Bitcoin for the tolls going through the Strait of Hormuz. I interpreted that as actually a really big deal, but maybe I'm blowing out of proportion. For me, I looked at that as more important in terms of Bitcoin's adoption on like an international and neutral currency stage, more so than El Salvador. But maybe I'm just getting ahead of myself.
Yeah, well, Iran is the largest sovereign Bitcoin miner in the world.
Yeah, I figured.
Iran and Russia mine more Bitcoin as a sovereign nation state than anyone. You know, like El Salvador had the whole Bitcoin volcano bond project, which hasn't materialized yet.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if they're, using the geothermal volcano powers and everything. I already did that in Iceland, by the way, in 2014.
Oh.
I launched a volcano bond because all the power in Iceland is generated from the volcanoes. And we were using Iceland's geothermal cooling. And we built out a ginormous mining farm in Iceland in 2014 and constructed a Bitcoin bond from it. And pensioners, we were paying out like over thousands of Bitcoin, like just from mining Bitcoin in 2014 in Iceland. We did that at Bank to the Future. But anyway, and we were trying to help El Salvador do that as well, but it hasn't materialized yet. I think it's because the IMF is still
got their claws in there.
When I was there were people recording our calls from the IMF. When we were there, we left feeling very uncomfortable, and decided, there's an internal struggle happening there. But yeah, Iran is the largest Bitcoin sovereign miner in the world, as is Russia as well. And yeah, we're going to have nuclear energy powering Bitcoin mining in Iran. Now, the fact that there's an interesting thing, like it could just be corruption, right? One IRGC member saying, we'll help you get through if you give me some Bitcoin. Yep. Or it could be actually what they're negotiating. But I guarantee you what they are negotiating right now is the currency. America wants this in dollars and in rails they can control. And Iran wants this in Chinese yuan and settled through potentially Bitcoin and various other things. You'll get some of that. You won't get all of that, depending on the power dynamics. And obviously the Gulf wants Iran integrated into coordinated OPEC release of oil. That's what they're really negotiating. This is all about currency and energy. Now, there is also the real power play of China is building all this renewable energy, wind energy, solar energy, like on scales that are absolutely ginormous. Europe's going to want to protect themselves because they're going to be vassalized into all this LNG dependency from America. Maybe we're getting something with BRICS. I doubt that. That's where they should go if they were sovereign, but they're not. And nuclear energy is the real big disruption here. So we're, the people that control these wars, the big oil, the big financial industrial complex, you'll also notice, did you see that Trump's Truth Social company, a public company, ended up getting fusion technology investments integrated into his public offering, and the share price went through the roof as a result of it.
Yeah, I did not notice that. I did notice that for some reason there's like 11 nuclear scientists missing, but I didn't notice the investment.
Yeah, you had all these assassinations as well.
Yeah,
remember all the Japan stuff as well. Like, we've seen some very interesting stuff with Japan. Like, remember that assassination and regime change that happened in Japan?
Yep.
That was the same president that was negotiating with Iran in order to settle deals direct. And a bunch of the shipments through to Japan got targeted. These are the real power games. These are the real power structures. This is big oil. This is energy. We're already starting to see the impact of energy from this operation. And then we've got these big disruptions with renewable energy and nuclear and various other things. These are, and fusion, like these are real big games. This is the highest level of assassinations, mafiosa, and government power at work. And Trump's playing, you can see his financial incentives are all aligned with these big games, which is why I know he's cooperating. He's not there to make America great again. He's there to asset strip America for the elites.
Incredible. Simon, in the coming weeks, is there anything in particular you're going to be on the lookout for? Is there something that we should try and pay close attention to moving forward? We're going to have you again probably in the coming weeks for another update, but is there anything in particular people should be on the lookout for?
Yeah, it's the same thing. We've got to look at the yield on the 10-year, yield on the 30-year bond in the US, yields globally, UK, Europe, like Japan, how these currency pegs in the Gulf countries are going to be maintained, where the AI money is going to come from. These energy prices, significant infrastructure investments. The Gulf countries, are they going to be investing? If they do invest, there's going to be serious terms that change the world. What about Japan? Is Japan going to allow their interest rates to run away? That's decoupling from the Japan carry trade. What about those, what about Taiwan? Like, how are they going to solve their energy crisis? Is China going to sell them some oil? The chip manufacturing supply chains, Europe, jet fuel shortages, the trucker industry as a result of this diesel shortages, these different components that are needed. You have to watch it all. Fertilizers, food insecurity, which countries are those going to be in? Like we're watching all of it right now. And honestly, like you're either an insider or you're just stacking sats. Like, I don't know how to say anything else right now. Like the difference between the S&P and its bull market versus foreign stock markets, relative strength. The same with the currencies. You got to look at all of this stuff. Yeah. Or you can just sit back, listen to podcasts and stack sats. And I think that's the great equalizer for everybody, really.
And I agree. At the end of the day, the answer to all this, the best thing that you can do for yourself, for your family, for your community is to just Bitcoin in self-custody. Learn how to take Bitcoin in self-custody and keep stacking sats. Simon, thank you again. This was last minute. Hugely appreciate you coming on to give us an update. Where can everybody go to check out your work? If they want to go back to the library of stuff too, because you cite so much information, where can they find that?
Yeah, I publish everything on my blog, simondixon.com. And whenever I get these complaints of people in the comments saying, yeah, all conspiracy theories, can you cite it? Like, can you imagine how long and how painful this interview would be if I had to cite everything? But I do actually cite everything on my website. So if you want to know the operations like 9/11, JFK, all of the nuclear programs, various other things, I've got individual blogs where I cite to documentaries, court documents, all that type of stuff, which books to read. And so I publish all of that on simondixon.com on my blog. And then I do two other things. Each week I go live on YouTube, where I follow the money every single week and try and forecast what comes next. And then when I get it wrong, I analyze what I got wrong. When I get it right, I double into it to say what I think comes next. That's in technology, macro, and geopolitics. And then in real time, I try and give real time commentary on X and join spaces and stuff, and engage in real time if you want to ask me a question. So that's pretty much it.
Hey guys, thanks for watching the video. Just wanted to quickly let you know we're going to be doing our annual Bitcoin survival workshop covering how to privately use and acquire Bitcoin, June 28th in Banff. You can scan the QR code or check the link in the description to learn more. Would love to have you there. If you enjoyed this episode with Simon Dixon, please do like and subscribe, and check out the previous episode we did with Simon and Larry Lepard or the recent live stream.